Welcome back in. Well, let's pull up a chair. Let's gather around this table here. We are back once again around the fantasy football, the redraft roundtable. Grant, welcome in again. How are we doing? It's end of week 3. We're getting ready to week 4. How are we feeling after 3 weeks of fantasy football?
Pretty good, I think so far. I think we've been surprised in a lot of ways. It's been a one of the weirdest starts to fantasy football, I think, just overall throughout the league with scoring. But yeah, getting through it, lots to talk about, and definitely some interesting strategies and things we have. You got to go through now that you're starting week 4, kind of the meat of your season.
Yeah, it's kind of last week before bye weeks start. And it's really, if you've not done so yet, it's now time to let go of preseason narratives we may have said to ourselves. We've had,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's injuries that have made this to be a very interesting start to the week or the season, or maybe it's just players either overachieving, underachieving for the week or for the last 3 weeks. That again, it's kind of weird. So,
Yeah.
did you have a kind of a surprise from week 3 that you just saw it and you're like, wow, I didn't expect that?
For me, I think it was overall the Saints' offense. I
Mm.
mean, I know that we kind of talked about it some, but after, you know, uh, Cowboys defense played the way they did week 1, I think we were thinking more competitive game week 2, and they got blown out. And so then the Saints play with the Eagles, and we're like, okay, it's going to be a high scoring game, two good offenses, and a lot of fan favorites, including hot waiver commodity Rashid Shaheed got
Hmm.
0 points. Had a touchdown pass go off his chest, and that's just how this real football works. But that was a big surprise for me. I think was overall the Saints' offense laying as big of a dud as they did, especially with how the Eagles gave up points the last few weeks. So I was kind of surprised on how that happened. That was because we were really talking about last week. You remember we were talking about like all these teams like they look okay, but the Saints offense looks crazy and like get a piece if you
Yep.
can, and how quickly the turntables, right?
Yeah.
And so now we're at a spot where we're now looking at them and saying, okay, they're normal, they're human.
Yeah, and it could be either the Eagles and Vic Fangio just decided we're going to go man and they can't stop us, and that's the blueprint to
Yeah.
stopping them, or just it's one of those weeks. Any given Sunday, like we just saw, I think the surprise Andy Dalton looks like the second coming of Tom Brady under
Mm-hmm.
in Carolina. So I think Carolina had a Bryce Young problem. Um, I
Yep.
don't think that means Bryce Young is totally done, totally washed, because we've seen different quarterbacks leave from Carolina and now are being productive. I understand he's coming off a bad week, but Baker Mayfield has been productive for a season. He was in Carolina for a while and Cleveland before that, but Sam Darnold, he is having a resurgence now with Minnesota. So who's to say with that? But yes, very surprising. I think Sam Darnold's where I'm still surprised of. He's had 2 tough matchups, and yet he's produced in both those games. So if we're not saying Sam Darnold's for real, we might want to start saying that Sam Darnold might be for real this year in fantasy football.
Mm-hmm.
So I think some of those times, the sooner you say that this is now not just a blip, this is a trend, and jump on it, the better off you are. So if you went late quarterback and were able to pick up Sam Darnold, was a hot waiver wire commodity this week. So waivers have already run, but if he's still there, now's the time to get him before it's too late. So
Mm. Yeah. Good point.
So, speaking of surprises, and we're talking wide receivers this week. A lot of
Mm.
wide receiver talk this week. And Grant, you and I talked all through offseason about teams, about changes, what could be. We were telling ourselves certain narratives that said, this is why I would like to draft these players.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing some of those play out. We are also not seeing some of those, or what the potential is. So with wide receivers, we now have 3 weeks of data, and we've got kind of a list of 5 main guys that we want to talk about tonight. But with the 5 main guys comes about 3 other that are teammates. We can talk situations. Some of them were questions that we had in the offseason of how is this team going to look? And now that we have this data, again, going back to the sooner you're on a trend before your league mates are, that's how you win, is you would jump on certain things quicker than most. So want to kind of talk about these players, and you may own some of them, or at least roster some of them in your league, and that's great. Or this may be a talking point of, hey, these players might be available, or maybe I want to stay away from them. So, yeah, anything to add before we get jumping on this list here today?
Yeah, no, I think the discussion we're going to have is going to be really good because you're really what we're talking about here is production, right?
Mm-hmm.
Looking at numbers, looking at definable things that help determine receivers' value for fantasy, and you kind of have to leave the ego at the door a little bit because I'm guilty of this. Is you draft a receiver in the second round or the first round or even the third, and you hold on to them because in your mind you're like, well, I'm like how good I am at fantasy is tied to this draft pick. Or it's like, well, I think I'm good at fantasy, therefore I drafted this guy, so like I have to play him, and you have this unrealistic view of like what your players are worth. So looking and doing what we're about to do really helps kind of say, okay, looking at production, looking at usage, looking at real stats that we can find trends and utilize these players.
Yeah, and I'll give a caveat. This list doesn't include we don't have anybody from the Miami Dolphins on this list. I didn't want to include players that the quarterback's injured or the player may be injured. It is players who are literally having the season that we either were wanting, or these are the players that have that potential to have the season that says this is what we want. And we now have 3 points of data. Like you said, it's actionable production that we can say this is what we are seeing. And I understand 3 points of data is not a lot, but this is fantasy football, and we only get 17 points of data every year, and that's not a lot. So you have to take a small sample size within a small sample size and say, here's what I'm making my assumption on. So we're going to look at, I think at the new stat point I've been hearing for fantasy football is first read looks. And we don't have first read looks in our definition, but I'm also of the opinion you can get so much noise with certain data points that it's then not actionable. You don't know what to do with it. So look at that target percentage for the team that they are on, what reception, how many receptions they have, yards, touchdowns, and then looking at snaps and snap percentages, because I think the snaps and the percentage that they're on the field correlate to, is this player getting the most out of what they have, or is there something bigger going on? And then we can look at just points per game and total points if we want to, and then from that make a decision. Is this a player that we want to roster? Do we want to trade for him? Or if we roster him, do we need to maybe trade away to try and get some value out of it while it's still high? So start off here. Start off with, this is a wide receiver that end of first round in some leagues, depending on how deep, but second round pick, more consensus. After really the first tier of wide receivers, so after your Jeffersons, Chase, Amon-Ra, that type of wide receiver, more leading to that second tier is Garrett Wilson. And the offseason, all about Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, and this team can do great things. It's Brees Hall it's Garrett Wilson. These are the two you want to target really high in drafts, and they were targeted highly in drafts. Right now, after 3 weeks, he is sitting at wide receiver rank 28. So,
Mm.
just first thought before we dive into some of the data, is that where we thought it was going to be? Is it lower? Just watching some of the games, what's kind of just the initial gut call of like, should we be concerned about this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think with Garrett Wilson, there is a little concern. Obviously, that's why he's on the list and we're talking about him. I'm assuming, right? It's a good case
Yep.
study, but
Yep.
yeah, I mean, a lot of talent there. Third year in the league, rookie year. Obviously, didn't have Aaron Rodgers. His sophomore season last year, he obviously had the Aaron Rodgers tearing his Achilles game one. So everyone, the hype train was high, right?
Yep.
And where we are right now is where people wanted to be at last year, right? With Garrett Wilson. So yeah, I mean, overall, like, I mean, they've played some interesting games. They played the 49ers, they played the Patriots, they played the Titans. Kind of a variety of different skill levels of defenses, I would say.
Yep.
Wilson is getting a lot of snaps, but again, it's one of those things where, like, yeah, if you drafted him in the second round, you're hoping for a top 5, top 6 receiver, and that's not happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's good to where I think there's definitely need to be cautionary there for him. It's not been the easiest road, though. I will say that it's not been the easiest path so far for Garrett Wilson. So I think there is some hope yet that this season is going to get turned around. He's going to have an upswing. So diving into some of the numbers, he's got on average per game, he's averaging about 12.2 points per game. And this is coming from Fantasy Pros data here. But total, he's at 36.5 points for the season. Now, snap percentage, he's on the field 93% of the time. And I put snap count in there, and the Jets have 168 snaps for offense this year. I put that in there as the higher the number, that means the more opportunities offenses are going to have. And they are probably on the higher end, more kind of the middle, but the higher end definitely of the players that we're looking at today. Not the top. They are also by far not the bottom. There are other players on here that are not getting anywhere close to that. So on the field for over 90% of the plays, they're running a good pace. And again, it's been his points have come from he's got 15 receptions, 150 yards, 1 touchdown. So 1 touchdown, 3 games. You'd like the production for touchdowns to be up from that. But he's getting almost a 30% target share. He's at 28% target share for the Jets. So that's elite numbers from a target percentage. And he's almost at 30 targets for the year. So out of 3 games, he's getting the target share. He has a good amount of targets. Touchdowns are a little low. Snaps are high. To me, this says all the peripherals are there for him to continue to climb upwards. But I could be wrong. As you hear that, as you see the data, do you see anything different than that, though?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that you also think like the quarterback situation, right? Which is like you've got Aaron Rodgers throwing to him, which helps a lot. And again, not trying to include our preseason biases that are very easy to include with this because we're saying, oh, we drafted this guy in the first round, in the second round, like he's going to be good, he's going to get better, right? But I think objectively, I think hopefully you drafted him as your receiver 1, probably with a hero RB or some other drafting method. Like realistically, he is playing like a solid flex. Like in terms of production, that's what Garrett Wilson's providing you, 12 points a game, right? And I think half point PPR. I think that's correct. So to me, like that's a solid flex / receiver 2 production, right? So you're gonna start him for sure. Like, that's the thing, is unless you're just stupidly stacked at receiver, like, it boils down to, like, yes, you want the production to be there, you want it to be higher, but realistically, like, with the environment, like you mentioned, the peripherals, the quarterback, also too with the Jets not being as good last year, they get an overall decent schedule. So to me, that all spells a situation where I think his floor is receiver two, with
Yeah.
upside being getting into that like borderline receiver one range. So to me, I see Garrett Wilson as someone that if you want to trade for him, if you can trade for another receiver two and get him, I think the upswing is there. Definitely would not try to sell. I think at this point, I think we've seen the floor. We've seen like points wise what he can do when even when there's a bad game, when the game scripts are very negative, like it's the 49ers, right? You still saw a good game from him.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the price of whatever you're trading is definitely key for if you're buying, selling, or holding. So I think the safe answer is to hold him. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but you mentioned the schedule, and this is where I would actually say if you can get um, comparable value, let's say, and another player we'll talk about later, you can get somebody, let's say Chris Olave for Garrett Wilson straight up. And we talked through trades. I get wide receiver to wide receiver trades, not good as far as like not really your forte. But I'm going to use this as an example. If you can get a Chris Olave type where Olave is underperformed this year as well, on a good offense, on a offense that has had 2 out of 3 good games, I would trade Garrett Wilson for Chris Olave. And
Mm.
part of the reason I'm going to do that right now is this is the next month of games for Garrett Wilson. Sunday, they get the Broncos. So that means Wilson's probably shadowed by Pat Surtain. That's not necessarily a good matchup. Next week, they get the Vikings. That's going to be a hard matchup. Vikings have a really good defense, in my opinion. Then it's the Bills. Now, that could be a tricky one where I think it's a good offense, and the Bills have kind of steamrolled some easy games early on. So that one may be okay. But then after that, they get the Steelers. And Steelers have one of the best defenses in the league right now, in my opinion. They uh, don't allow points. They want to, like we talked about in the offseason, they want to get in a dogfight, and they'll just drag you through the mud. So if you are worried about production, I think now's the time to sell based on that next month, where after that, you could probably potentially get back if there's a dip in production based on those 4 weeks.
Mm.
But again, I wouldn't sell low where you said if it's a, wide receiver two, um, yeah, if you're getting a, let's say the, well, Rashid Shaheed owner, league manager in your league is like, hey, Rashid Shaheed by the numbers, doing way better than Garrett Wilson. I'm going to hold. So I don't know.
Mm.
Thoughts on that as we kind of take into, like you said, we're now past the preseason, off season. What are we doing? This is in season. I got to figure out maybe you're 2-1, maybe you're 1-2, and you need some production now. I don't know. Thoughts on kind of that approach to Garrett Wilson as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, like what you said is like, while yes, it on paper and peripherals are good. You're right. The schedule is unfortunate, and with only a few data points, then you haven't seen a season long production where you've seen him go against elite defenses. You've seen three. So to me, all the points you bring up are good. I think if you're trying to get production now, it depends on how desperate you are. I think if you're 2-1, you're probably on the inside track, or 3-0 to go to the playoffs.
Yep.
Not guaranteed, but like it. I think 2-1's in a good spot, especially you go 3-1. If you are like 0-2 or 1-2 or 0-3, then I think it's really there's some cause for concern because you have to make up some ground to get into
Yep.
the playoffs, and you really have to work hard. So yeah, I think if you're in that spot, I think selling Garrett Wilson for comparable value, if you're really scared, is worth it. I still think you hold on to him a couple more weeks because I think that, and you could look for a big game, right, and then try to sell or something. I never love selling receivers that are like at playing at their floor. I feel like
Yep.
for multiple weeks because that's the value you're going to get. You want to like get a crazy 30-point game from him where he catches some crazy 90-yard touchdown or something like that, and then sell him at that point.
Yeah, no, and that's where you and I talk trades and philosophies. I don't like buying low, selling high, all that stuff. But at
Mm,
the same time, a lot of your league mates may be doing that as well. So just understanding, like, if you
yep.
know it's a low point and you know what comparable value is, in this range, Chris Olave, even by the numbers, is comparable value and comparable value name wise as well. Um, it's not this is a pull the ripcord. We are jumping. Let's get out of this at any cost. So I agree with
Yeah.
that because,
Yeah, I
like you
agree.
said, peripherals look good. And if you do trade, I think he's also a target to keep on. What does the numbers say the next 4 weeks to know if he has a dip in production to go get at the right time? Because that then, if the manager then is let's say they're 1-2 now, and they then turn into their 2-4 in a month, um, and they need production, you might be able to acquire him a little cheaper that way. So
Mm.
that would be my thought on him. So yeah, we'll move on here from that's good start to our list. One of the kind of more interesting offenses that we talked about in the offseason, questions about how this offense was going to look. And in 3 weeks, we have pretty good data to show what this offense looks like, and that's the Houston Texans and their
Mm.
offense. One of the more prolific offenses last year, and with high hopes this year as well. Brought in Stephon Diggs. Last year, though, Tank Dell and Nico Collins both suffered injuries, so added high talent and depth to that wide receiver core. So the big question this offseason was, who are the targets going to go to, right? So after 3 weeks, we kind of have some answers to that, though, don't we? Or at least we see that. And right now, on the outside looking in, Tank Dell, if you went the Tank Dell route, you're kind of looking like, hey, I really don't like this. With thoughts there, though, as we dive into the Houston Texans offense here in the three wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Tank Dell production's down. I mean, the hope was that all three of these receivers would be top 20 receivers, right? That was the goal. They're all healthy. Stephon Diggs, a top target for Josh Allen, combined with Nico
Mm-hmm.
Collins, what he did last year, and Tank Dell, both of them being healthy. That was the hope. Sophomore year for CJ Stroud, he's matured a little bit and done more things. So, yeah, I think if you're a Tank Dell owner, I mean, you definitely didn't draft them the same ranking as obviously Stephon Diggs or Nico Collins, but still,
Right.
it's a decently high pick, and now you're kind of scratching your head like, oh no, I have like the definite third receiver in the room on Houston's offense. Like, what do I do, right? And I think that is a little more of a situation because unlike Garrett Wilson, where it's like you're at a ceiling or you're at a floor with Tank Dell, you almost feel like he can't really hit a ceiling because he's got two other people in the way, right?
Yeah, that's a good distinction of knowing if a player is playing at his floor or if there's not a ceiling to get to for a player because of the offense or it would take an injury basically for that receiver to produce. And I think that's kind of where you're going with that is
Mm.
something has to change for Tank Dell to do more. So I'll kind of run through all three at once. I'll start with Tank Dell. He is obviously, after 3 weeks, he's wide receiver 60. So I think a little bit lower than what people were drafting him at. Definitely up from the wide receiver rank. So you're obviously feeling it from a fantasy manager there. Um, he's got 22 points on the season so far. So on average per game, he's at about 7.5. He is only on the field though 66% of the time, And I think this is the big difference between him and the other two receivers here, where it's 138 snaps that he's been on. The Texans offense as a whole is up there with the Jets as far as like what they're running. So that is a little concerning. But he's got Tank Dell has a 16% target share. So he has 9 receptions on 17 targets and no touchdowns and has yet to eclipse 100 yards this season. So definitely a low point. Potentially major concern, especially when you go to the opposite side of that receiver room. Nico Collins, who ranks as wide receiver 6 right now, he's averaging 19, a little over 19 points a game, and he has almost 60 points. He's about 50, almost 58 points for after 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
The big difference I see here is he's on the field for 82% of snaps. So while Tank Dell's been out there for 138, Nico's been out there for 170. And again, the big difference is he has a 26% target share versus the 16, so 10% difference. And that shows with, 28 targets, 18 receptions, 338 yards, and a touchdown. So not there with the touchdowns, but he's there. Nico's there with the targets and the yards. And Diggs kind of playing that middle role for the team, ranked wide receiver 10. He's a little bit behind pace for his teammate Nico, where it's 16 and a half points per game. He's at almost 50, 49 and a half points on the season. He's out there almost the same snap percentage, 81%. So it's been about 2 snaps less than Nico Collins. The difference here is 2 touchdowns for Diggs, 164 yards. He has 20 receptions on 24 targets. So fewer targets, more receptions. So those are probably coming closer to the line of scrimmage versus Nico's is more the downfield. So a lot of information right there, big picture, but kind of thought process of as we go forward, I see, is there a buy low opportunity with one or more? Is there a sell high? Is there a buy high potentially? Like what are we thinking with the Houston wide receiver room?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've looked at them and they're close to where you drafted them, right? So
Right.
like it's pretty close. Like obviously there's some discrepancies here and there, but overall pretty accurate with their draft value. So to me, like I mean, if you're really trying to wheel and deal and move around, like I think you could probably look at Nico Collins and say, hey, I like the amount of I like the yardage, right? I like the yardage overall, the snap count. Like it's CJ's favorite target, right? Obviously by number of targets, and
Mm-hmm.
you could spin that, especially with the Texans kind of doing well, but we expected them to really turn on the gas this year, and they haven't quite done that, and so they've been good. They just haven't been this prolific offense they were last year. And so,
Right.
you could probably, if two things. If you have Nico, I think you could probably try to trade him away. But at the same time, I think it could be a whole opportunity. I mean, I think he's done well, and I don't really see a reason why you would need to trade him away unless you have a desperate need for something else, like if you have another running back or quarterback need, then I think it's a good opportunity for you to get some elite talent there in exchange for Nico Collins. But yeah, I mean, in terms of receivers, like it's his favorite target on a young quarterback and a good offense. Like it's pretty hard to top that. He's also receiver 6, so I mean he's just behind all the elite players that people really dumped high draft capital on. So honestly, like you're in a pretty good spot if you're a Nico Collins owner.
So if you're Nico Collins owner, if you're trading up, you're trying to get to that next trade level, so that next wide receiver tier. So, or maybe it's the 2 wide receiver tiers up, depending on where you have
Yeah.
Nico Collins. Like, um, you know, coming off of a almost 30-point game, would you go to the Jamar Chase owner and say, "Hey, I'll trade you Nico for Chase straight up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a reasonable trade. Like, I think Jamar Chase has now been practicing for a few weeks. Bengals are not looking good as a team. They've lost some tough games. Now, people will say, "Oh, the Bengals are bad." Well, I think they've lost 3 games by a total of it's something crazy now number of points. It's not a lot,
Yeah, it's not a lot.
and so like yeah, like NFL wins a win, a loss, but at the same time they're not a bad offense. Joe Burrow's been hyper efficient. Not a bad trade, honestly. I think it's a decent trade. You're probably not going to be able to pull this off, but if you go to the neighbor's owner and try to say, "Hey, he's a rookie. He had a couple of crazy games, like it's Daniel Jones," right? You start really talking him up. Maybe you try to package something, but
Yep.
the rookie factor exists for a lot of people still, so that could be something that you discuss. Like, obviously, you're a neighbor's owner in our home league. You're probably not taking that trade, obviously, because you know the potential of what's happening there. But for someone who's a little wary or understanding, like, oh, he scored, against the Commanders and the Browns all these points, right? He hasn't really
Right.
played anybody good, or whatever the argument is you want to wrap into that. Like, you could try to do something, and maybe the neighbor's owner gets a little spooked and tries to do something. But yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of options. There's like Amon-Ra St. Brown,
Right.
AJ Brown, Rashi Rice, like Jefferson. There's not a lot of people above Nico Collins in my mind. So at that point, you're really splitting hairs on who you like rest of season and bye weeks and stuff like that. But you already have one of the top receivers. Like, I would just be careful about trying to get too aggressive and you overtrade your position.
I think if I'm trading Nico, I'm trying to trade up. So
Yeah.
trying to get that top tier receiver, saying I'm going to use that I have wide receiver 6 for the year by points per game, and saying I'm getting wide receiver 1 production out of him. So I want that next name. I want that next level up. Um, and yeah, as a if you want the neighbors plus something else because it's a risk factor, I don't think that's a bad way to approach it. To say, yeah, he's the number 1 wide receiver right now, but can he handle a full season of right now? I think I saw he was neighbors is on pace for like over 200 targets for the season. So
Yeah.
as a rookie, is he going to stay healthy through all that? Like, there's more risks. So, neighbors plus a running back if you want a stash to say, yeah, I'll give you a more certain wide receiver on a good team, and I'll take the
Mhm.
risk plus something else. So I don't think that's a bad thing to do. I would try to trade off. I think I'd probably try to sell Stephon Diggs, as he is getting the receptions close to the line of scrimmage, and he's got 2 touchdowns. Those both happened week 1. So I'm probably looking at the Diggs owner, or as a Diggs owner, I'm probably trying to package him to try to trade up, and maybe it's for somebody like a Devonta Smith, or maybe it's like you said, AJ Brown, where hey, Smith's got concussion right now, so he might miss a couple weeks. Or AJ Brown might be out to the bye, so I want to try to trade up to that next level. I like the AJ Brown side potentially. I don't love the hamstring, so that may be part of the negotiation of that, but trying to trade up to get that next level using the fact that, hey, Diggs is a top 10 wide receiver right now. So he's producing well. And you're giving a valuable asset that if you don't think it's going to last, then yeah, definitely this is the time to trade him away. Thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, there's a lot of he had a successful week 1, scored a lot of points, and has taken the backseat to Nico, like we talked about. So I agree with you. I think that if you could talk to the Diggs owner and say, or I'm sorry, if you are the Diggs owner, sorry, and you are trying to get value for him, I think it's a good play. I mean, again, I don't think Diggs is a bad receiver, but I think you're trying to upgrade your position, right? So at that point, I think you could try to maybe go for a, who knows, like maybe like a Marvin Harrison or like a Chris Godwin or something like that, where it's like, okay, I'm probably upgrade my position a little more, kind of a little more steady if you want more of a floor, right? And like rather than this like I'm going to score 30 points or it might be 10 or something like that. So I think that's probably a more reasonable position if you're a Diggs owner.
I like that. I like that approach there. So, want to throw this out there. I'm going to switch to Tank Dell real quick. So,
Mm-hmm.
is he a buy or sell in your mind based on his production? Is he a buy or a sell?
Yeah. I think it's got to be a buy, right? Because his value is so low. I mean, I think in some leagues he's probably even on the waiver. I would say on some 10-man leagues, probably on the waiver for a lot of
Right.
people, especially if a short bench. Like,
Right.
so to me, like it is a pickup if you're on the waiver, or it's a definitely buy low because at that point, like you're buying him at his lowest possible value. He's receiver 60. Hopefully your team's good enough where you can buy him for cheap for a backup running back or something like that. First, maybe the other owner has a like a Josh Jacobs or something like that, right? And like you like go for a backup or something. Whatever you're trying to do to like fortify your running back position, or they are, you get Tank Dell, sit on your bench. Something happens to Nico Collins or Stephon Diggs becomes that receiver too. But yeah, I think definitely buy low. I mean, there's selling him, you're gonna get nothing, right? You're gonna get absolutely nothing. So you might as well either hold it or try to buy low and just hope that the offense turns around or somebody in front of them changes, has an injury or something like that.
So if I'm trying to sell him, and this probably won't happen, but if I'm going strictly by points and rankings off points, again, I don't think this would actually happen. So I gotta be careful with this, but I wouldn't be able to sell Tank Dell for Brandon Ayuk. They have very similar as far as points and points production. 7.5, 7.6. Brandon Ayuk has scored almost 23 points versus the 22.4. So they are very close in production. The reason I say I don't think I'd get this, I would probably, if I'm a Tank Dell owner, I'm probably going to venture that offer. The reason I'm probably not getting it is all the reason we've said. Tank Dell's in a 3-man offense who is the lowest on the total poll as far as right now, 3 weeks. Brandon Ayuk, while he got outscored by Juwan Jennings, which if I'm trying to make this, I'm going to point all this out of, hey, even though George Kittle missed, Deebo Samuel missed, Christian McCaffrey's not there, Brandon Ayuk still didn't produce points. It was Juwan Jennings that freaking produced all the points. So they're not even looking Brandon Ayuk's way. I would try to get that angle. But if I'm the Ayuk owner, I'm not giving it up just because I know what Ayuk is capable of. And I'd rather still take the potential number 1 target for San Francisco, good offense, versus the number 3 potentially with spike week production on that offense. So I bring that up just to, name recognition aside, that's similar production that I don't think is going to happen, but I say, hey, try it. See what you can get.
Yeah, exactly. And you also look at it too, like we talk about the floor and ceiling a lot, right?
Right.
And it's like you look at Tank Dell, like here's his band, right? And he is like in terms of ceiling, in terms of floor, like he's hitting a ceiling with what he can do, right? You look at an Ayuk or a Garrett Wilson or something, right?
Right.
Their bands like this. So while there might be an intersection of points like we're talking about here, right? With like, hey, points scored is roughly in this area. The thing is like the potential for a Garrett Wilson to like, all right, that is floor, number 1 receiver, 93% snap rate, Aaron Rodgers, Brees Hall running the ball, like all these things are good things, right? So like that's what we're talking about is like the situation's better and like like at the end of the day, it's all luck, it's all probability with fantasy football, like real football, and like we could be wrong. You could say the same thing, like, oh, he's gonna hit a floor, he's gonna hit the ceiling forever, ever, and like guess what happens? Like it doesn't happen, and like Garrett Wilson has all the tools there, he doesn't take off. Like kind of what I'm fearing Michael Pittman's going to be, right? Where it's like you thought the tools were there in the preseason when you drafted him for him to succeed and be that target. It's not happening.
Yeah, I think Michael Pittman's problem, and I left him off this list for a reason, but I think he has a Anthony Richardson problem. And until either Richardson figures it out or something changes with Indianapolis, Michael Pittman's going to be having a problem.
Yeah.
So, yeah. No, I agree with that. I think, and those are good points, I think, to just remember, especially as the season goes on, of the ceilings, floors, the probability. What's the probability that a Garrett Wilson hits versus like a Tank Dell? Probability is higher for a Garrett Wilson than a Tank Dell unless something changes. So you're playing the numbers game, you're playing the probability. It's not exact science, because if it was, we'd all be able to figure it out, and we can't. So it's a game within a game that the ball is not round. It's oval, it's oblong, it bounces weird, so it's going to bounce weird every once in a while. So we're going to go with it. Okay, switching up here. Another situation, 2 wide receivers, same team, but this kind of a surprising team for football in general. Had a down week this week. That's the New Orleans Saints, but I want to highlight Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave, teammates. Drafted very opposite of the end of the draft. So Shaheed was either, if you're in a deep league, he was drafted late, or he's a waiver wire pickup for a lot of teams, so wasn't drafted at all, whereas Chris Olave is taken in, the top 2-3 rounds, depending on league size, structure, all that stuff. So, but in 2 games, they look very similar with what they're doing on the field. So let me make sure I get my numbers here right, because I don't know if I do. Oops. Yeah, so Chris Olave is scoring 12.2 points in 3 games, whereas Shaheed, I think I wrote my numbers down, is 12.4 per game. Yeah, I don't think I updated that one on my spreadsheet. So I don't think I added the 3rd week for Shaheed, but he's averaging 12.4. So they're both ranked, and again, this is Fantasy Pros, but Chris Olave is 28th. Whereas Shaheed is 26th. So again, Shaheed faced a dud. He had 0 this past week. So for all those that, want to say, well, why is that? A 0 doesn't help. And that wasn't an injury 0, so that doesn't help. But I think I got the rest of these for the everything else updated. I think I just missed that one on my spreadsheet. Anyway, snaps and everything else look very similar. Chris Olave is out there for 77% of the snaps, and Shaheed's out there for 70% of the snaps. New Orleans has not had to run as much offense, at least not with their high caliber players, partially because first 2 weeks they blew Carolina out the water, so studs didn't have to play. And then Dallas, they kind of just were boat race Dallas, so they also didn't have to play the full. So that kind of plays into it a little bit. Each of them have 2 touchdowns. Olave actually has outgained Shaheed's yards. He has 178. And I want to check this again. Versus I have 169 for Shaheed, which that doesn't necessarily add up in my mind, but I could be wrong. So anyway, I'll check that. Yep, so 169 yards for Shaheed. So anyway, the point with them is it's very simple. They each have had 14 targets. They are getting the same target percentage. Part of the difference is Shaheed has had 7 receptions versus Olave's 12. So Shaheed, it looks like from the numbers, he's used more as a downfield threat. He has had some big games. He's had some spike weeks. What's kind of the difference if you look at these players, the situation? What's kind of that difference is Olave? We kind of mentioned him. He's in the same realm as Garrett Wilson. Shaheed's up a little bit higher as far as the points go. Is there a sell high? Is there a buy low? If you're an Olave holder, do you know more production's coming? Are we wary of the production with Shaheed? What are we kind of looking at here with this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think my first initial knee jerk reaction is to buy low with Shaheed with a donut because that is a perfect time to go after anybody. He had 5 targets in that game. He had a touchdown that bounced off his chest that would have been a lot of points and didn't get anything. Definitely more of a deep flex, right? It's going to be more of like your Hail Mary. I'm trying, it's not going to be someone who's going to be the James White of the Patriots, kind of 9, 10 points in your flex every week. Not going to happen. It's going to be a 0 like this, or it's going to be 25. That's how it's going to be.
Yep.
I think it's with his target. His targets. You average it out for 3 games, and obviously you've got a 0, but that's a little under 3 targets a game. Sorry, catches a game, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big deal. Like, it's going to be a downfield threat. I think the perfect example, especially in a league where you have 3 receivers and you have to start additional player that is used as like a bomb. I think it's a great option for a deep flex. I think if you have him, definitely start him. I think he's going to rebound. I would try to buy low because the production, like you mentioned, which is a great comparison of Olave versus Shaheed, they're almost the same. But the name value of Olave, people are carrying that draft stock with Olave and saying, wait, I burned this high pick on him. Like, he's going to come back. And so you will never get the same value. I guarantee you, if you have a team where you offer an equivalent player to the Olave owner and the Shaheed owner, you're going to get 2 completely different responses. The Olave owner is probably going to say, no, this is not worth it. I don't want this. Whatever this player is, the Shaheed owner is going to be like, oh, wow, like, I'm fleecing this guy, right? And it's the same production.
Yeah, no, and I'll throw out a name here. Just he ranks higher. Just he's had 2 very good weeks. One not so good week. Week 1 wasn't so good. But if I have Quentin Johnson, are you trying to upgrade to Shaheed from Quentin Johnson?
Ooh. That could be tough because of peripherals. I think it's just because the Chargers, like, we don't know if Herbert's going to start Sunday versus the Chiefs. They've got a bunch of other linemen that are banged up and stuff like that. But, I mean, yes, I think before the Herbert injury, I think that's not the worst trade. I think it's comparable. I think the Chargers situation, though, is not as good as the Saints. I think Derek Carr has things moving for them. And they're the 2nd or 3rd best pass offense in the NFL right now, the Saints are. So that's something to think about and consider, is that a piece of that pie is going to be very good for the player versus maybe a piece of another pie from like the Chargers offense, right? Where we've seen Herbert, we've seen him throw the ball a lot, and he's now in the 175 to 200 club with the Chargers. Like, they're playing more ground and pound with Dobbins. So, anyways, all to say is I think that it's you're right. The comparable is that, right? And I think that if you're the Shaheed owners, or if you could talk to them, you might be able to navigate and kind of squeeze out some value that you wouldn't get otherwise.
Yeah, or like you said, like same type of principle with like a Tank Dell or Diggs, where it's like I want a higher caliber running back for, or you're gonna give a running back that has some potential, but you're, like you said, offering it at a low point so far. Again, 3-week, but a definite low point with 0 points to Shaheed, saying, I'll take some volatility for a wide receiver if he's my 3, or if I need a flex position. Say I'm going to take some volatility here, knowing I have boom week potential with its 20-point boom weeks if it hits. And especially if I've structured my team where I have some safer weekly production from other places, knowing I can handle a potential 0. I don't think all of them are going to be 0s, but a potential 0, and say I'll live with it, and we'll go on from there. So, yeah, I think it's understanding how your team is structured too. If you have a lot of risky, high volatile players, don't add another one, because that may be catastrophic. If all of your players miss, that's a 20-point week for your fantasy team because everybody missed. So I think there's some strategy involved with that. So all right, a couple more players here we'll hit on. Don't think it'll be quite as long. No teammates to talk about this time, but just team dynamics. So one, we're gonna hit here, DJ Moore. So Chicago, really good offense in the offseason. Caleb Williams got brought in, supposed to be a very dynamic, crowded room. Ends up the offensive line has had issues keeping Caleb Williams on his feet. Running game has been absent. Keenan Allen's also been injured. DJ Moore's teammate, Ramondunze, spike week this last week. So, but there, I think, is some room for hope. So he ranks as the wide receiver 28 right now. So right in that Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed range, Garrett Wilson range. He is right there with actually right in line with Garrett Wilson of 12.2 points a game, 36.5 points total. He is on the field for 94% of Chicago's plays. That actually tops him on our list. I'm not going to say league-wide this is the top, but that tops on our list at over 200 snaps he's playing. That tells me a lot of opportunity, a lot of offense, no touchdowns. So touchdowns, to me, when I think about touchdowns, they aren't sticky. So player has a lot of touchdowns. They've overachieved that, so they might come back to earth in the second half of the season. Same, if they don't have a lot of touchdowns in the early part of the season, they might have more. They have more probability says they're going to have more. It'll average out over the course of the season. Get through all this here. 167 yards, 19 receptions on 28 targets. He has a 25% target share, which is actually a very respectable, healthy target share for, I say, a potential wide receiver 2, but he's playing at a wide receiver 3 level right now. So thoughts on DJ Moore, Chicago Bears, as we kind of dive into this one a little bit.
Yeah. I think that DJ Moore, I think this is where we thought he would be, right, in a crowded receiver room. What my question is when Keenan Allen comes back. Now, I know Keenan Allen is, he's older. He's been notorious with the Chargers to miss several games this season easily, right? So we don't know how long the injury is going to happen. We don't know the extent of what's happening, right? Like he's week to week right now. We don't know. But the thing is, if you add Keenan Allen back into the rotation, you're kind of looking at a Houston Texans situation where all of a sudden you have mouths to feed, but instead of having C.J. Stroud, who threw for 40-something hundred yards or whatever he did last year, you have Caleb Williams, who's got an offensive line that's making him run for his life. So, and to me, and they can't run the ball, so that doesn't help. They don't have a Joe Mixon back there to help take care of things. So to me, that game script and the peripherals, I think, makes it tougher if Keenan Allen comes back. So to me, what I'm probably trying to do is, if we're talking about like the same tiers, I might be trying to go get a Chris Olave with a DJ Moore, knowing that, okay, well, Keenan Allen's going to come back and probably dilute some of those targets that DJ Moore is getting. Like, yes, touchdowns might come, right? But at the same time, like, to me, I think Caleb Williams is still doing growing pains, which is normal for a rookie quarterback. But
Absolutely.
I think overall, to me, I think DJ Moore is enjoying that receiver 2 status, but which we thought it was going to be with Keenan Allen in the mix. But what's happened is now it's been shifted down. Dunze has kind of taken over that role, and Caleb Williams doesn't look as good as we thought. So I think those factors combined tends to let me leave like, hey, maybe if Keenan Allen's out one more week, you see if you can chance it, get a good week out of him, and then sell high on like a really good like 15, 20-point week where he scores a touchdown or something next few weeks, and then you try to ship him off.
Does it change for you at all? So I think we're definitely seeing some growing pains in Chicago. Is that coaching staff related? is that rookie quarterback didn't play very much in the preseason, trying to get used to the speed of the game, trying to get used to all this, that as the season progresses, it does get better. And
Hmm.
the other question I would have is, there's always a concern with, yes, Keenan Allen may come back and be okay. Is it a guarantee that Keenan Allen is just going to be the third wide receiver and out there that he's taking that role then?
Mm.
I mean, those are all the
Yeah, no, good point.
concerns. Yeah, those are all the
Yep.
concerns. Those are valid. I guess has now with the resurgence of Odunze, does that take over maybe some of Allen's role that DJ Moore is there and Odunze's now stepped up and Allen's now third fiddle?
Yeah, I think there is concern. I think for sure. I would imagine the veteran presence. Caleb Williams talked about how much he appreciated Keenan Allen in the offseason, how much,
Mm-hmm.
like really, and Keenan Allen's talking up. There's videos of him talking up Caleb Williams to the sideline, like, hey, you need to move here, and like, this is where I'm going to go, and all these different, looking at doing routes and things like that on the sideline. So to me, you might be right. Keenan Allen might take over that receiver 3 route, right? And just like push everybody up, which is fair. But again, you're adding another piece to the pie, and Keenan Allen's taking over snaps. He is
Mm-hmm.
involved with targets, which is going to dilute in some form or fashion DJ Moore, right? So
Right.
that's what I'm concerned about. Like, so I think if to me, like again, it's one of those situations. How dire are you? If you're a 1-2 team and you need production now and you can't wait, Keenan Allen's out. Maybe see if you get a game out of them on. I think they play Sunday. See if you can get a game out of them on Sunday. Then move on. I don't know. Like, but again, if you're in a spot where you're 2-1, you might have the time and the patience to say, you know what, growing pains. The defense is going to carry them a decent amount this year. They played well against the Texans, that we thought was good. It was a good matchup on Sunday Night Football last week. So overall, like, can I hold on to these guys and make a play later in the season? Again, it depends on your team, because we
Sure.
talked about this last week. Fantasy football, yes, it's about playoffs and getting to the playoffs, but the thing is, you need to get those regular season wins to get to the playoffs. And if you don't pick up the wins in week 3 and 4 and 5, right, and all of a sudden you get to week 12 and you're in trouble.
Yeah, and maybe it's we've talked about players in the range, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed are all in the range of DJ Moore, but I like what you're saying too, especially if you get a good week out of Moore, and let's say you're not trusting the potential, but there's still some name value. You make a look at somebody like I'll throw out, if I'm a DJ Moore, have him on my roster. I'm gonna try to go get Khalil Shakir plus maybe a running back from that owner
Mm-hmm.
saying, look, I understand it's Shakir. He's doing well right now, but I want a little bit more, but I'll give you DJ Moore. Like we'll do that. And that may be a little too rich, but at the same time, there is a value of he's DJ Moore. He has produced with lesser quarterback, and there is still that potential that Chicago turns it around, they get better, and Moore just has a good season. So you're
Yeah,
taking a
you're right.
little, a little bit saying, look, I want a package for Moore, but I don't want to be too gritty with it, but I'm not just going to give him up for anything. So that may be
Mm-hmm.
how I approach it of like, hey, I wanted, these types of players for more type of a
Yeah.
situation.
Yep.
All right, last one on our list here. And this one may go a little quicker. So, Amari Cooper. Um, I think we're getting our answer of what the Browns are. It's not
Mm-hmm.
good.
Yeah.
As
No.
we mentioned, Michael Pittman has a Anthony Richardson problem. Amari Cooper, I think, has a Deshaun Watson problem. Um, you and I kind of talked about this earlier, where I think this is a coach quarterback struggle where the coach wants to run 12 personnel and the quarterback wants to run 11 personnel, and it's not really meshing. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
say all this. I understand Amari Cooper had a blow-up game Sunday. He had almost 30 points, PPR leagues. He was great. Him and Neighbors duked it out, battled it out. All of that's there. I get it. He's still ranked 34th wide receiver. He was drafted higher than that. He was, maybe for some teams, he's your wide receiver too.
Yeah.
Outside of Tank Dell, he's the lowest on average of our list. He's at 11.8, and I understand it's really close to like Olave, Moore, Garrett Wilson, but he's still lower than them. At 35.3 points for the season, he's got high snaps at 91% on the field for 195 snaps. That's a lot. That's good. He has 2 touchdowns, with both came this week, and we're both against the Giants. So I think that has to be in consideration. They play in a very tough division, and they still have to play in that tough division all year long. It's going to get cold. They don't typically like to throw as it gets cold in Cleveland. He's got 12 receptions, 26% target share on 29 targets. Are we taking this and saying this is the week to sell Amari Cooper, get out while you can, while he has some value, or are we hoping for something more to come?
Yeah, I think definitely sell. Definitely sell. It's been a tough situation for the Cleveland offense. I mean, it's what's really tough is he's scored 3 and 4 points the first 2 weeks of the season, respectively, right?
Yep.
Against, keep in mind, the Jaguars in week 2, who the Bills obliterated for 47 points. So when the number one receiver target, in my opinion, like, yes, I know NFL's is every given Sunday, certain matchups just warrant stats. That's how it works.
But that's a good matchup.
But at the same time, yeah. But at the same time, like with the Cowboys in week 1 did not play well. Saints receivers and Derek Carr and Kamara blew up the Cowboys, right? And then week 2, Jacksonville, who the Bills destroyed, and he scores 4 points. And then finally the Giants here, he doesn't get the 2 touchdowns, right? And like definitely Watson's favorite target. But again, I agree with you. If you're trying to move up a tier, I think this is definitely a week to do it. We talked about other receivers that we mentioned. We mentioned Stephon Diggs. We mentioned other Garrett Wilson. Even if you're trying to move up a tier, like this, you need a week like this to say, hey, like I'm going to sell him hot and say, hey, like look at this value. Amari Cooper, him and Deshaun Watson have a chemistry, but like they have, it's some brutal games. Like they do play the Raiders and the Commanders next couple games. So like a lull in the schedule, and then it starts getting tough with all the divisional games. So to me, that's a concern. Also, Deshaun Watson, like it's about time for him to get injured. Honestly, I mean he's due every year almost, and that's concerning as well. So to me, with everything going on with that offense, I'm trying to sell high on Amari Cooper if I can.
I agree with that. I honestly think this is still a window. If you can't, it's after, not this week with the Raiders, it's after the Washington game, after the Commanders, because the Raiders low-key have a pretty good secondary, and they've I understand they just got obliterated by Carolina. Totally get that 1 week, but they're low-key pretty good in their secondary. At least they were after 2 weeks, and this last week being kind of an outlier. But this may be the time, like you said, I agree, sell. And if you're trying to move up, or if there's a wide receiver that's kind of, not producing, maybe it's maybe it's somebody like Shakir. Maybe it's a Jameson Williams where you want a little more volatile, or you want just not quite the big name that you can say, I want that package deal, and I'll give you, I'm going to give you Amari Cooper. It's name value right there. So I don't personally like giving the name value, but it does work. And so you have to take that into consideration with your league mates.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where we we talked about at the start of this session using the draft potential. You can even throw around what you spent on them, right? Like, oh, Amari Cooper, I have this number of, this, I drafted him here. He's a receiver 1. Look at the depth chart, all this stuff. Like, I mean, do what you have to do, right? Like, the idea is not to swindle your teammates, but if they have like they really like a certain player, then sell them the player. Sell them the player.
Right. Absolutely. I agree. If they're like, if you drafted them like, oh, I really wanted Amari Cooper there, understand that and go after, like, let them have that again. So absolutely. Well, great. This was fun looking over. Of course, didn't look at the entirety of the wide receiver list, but we don't have time for that. I think we hit on a lot as far as kind of the wide variety of players we either drafted high, aren't doing so well, players we are having some breakout performances. Do we believe that? How do we approach that? So really good discussion here. But as we head into week 4, is there anything you're looking at week 4, NFL wise, fantasy wise, any of that? What are you looking at week 4?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm doing right now is, we talked about last week overreactions, right? What to do and how to process those, and are you panicking or not? And for me, this is kind of where the, like rubber meets the road with what you're doing with your benches, right? So to me, like, I'll be honest, I'm benching Michael Pittman this week. I gave him some time, and he's going on the bench, right? And I think this is the week where you kind of make decisions of like, okay, I've got this stud on paper, but he hasn't done well. I'm trying to trade for him. I'm trying to move things around. I think it's definitely something to think about, and to really like say, I'm giving up my draft value. I'm looking at who's performing the best on my team.
I was going to highlight that as well. I have Anthony Richardson. He is finding his way to the bench. They are playing the Steelers, and I will actually be playing Justin Fields in his place because there is one quarterback who is doing well and one quarterback that is not.
I agree.
I'm going to give a shout out. So I am in a league with my wife, and she has both Deontay Johnson and Michael Pittman on her team. She benched Michael Pittman this last week in place of Deontay Johnson, and that helped her win the week this week and be one of the top scorers. So you are right in line with, I think you're thinking of, until we see it or until things change, that's there. So, and I think that's good advice regardless, is be fluid week by week, be ready, and don't be held to your prior conviction of, I drafted this player, therefore he must produce. So the quicker we are more fluid with how we think about this, the better off we are as a whole. So,
yeah, 100%.
But, well, good. Well, we will head into week 4, and may your fantasy week go as well as you hope it does, and your teams do as well as you want as well. So with that, we will see you all next week.